We can adjust that if necessary, but most important is if we share. And this is it. Just before that, Moshe, can you give a thumbs up if you can hear us? Okay, great. Okay, so share. There you go. And then you can just in here you can just scroll down as we go along, so they have the page. Moshe, can you see the Makorot? Okay.
Give me a share on this.
That's it. No, so yeah, because we're going to scroll down.
Audible and visible.
Oh, you want me to do the scrolling for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't scroll that. Yeah, my capabilities. Good morning, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming back. That's what happens when you leave for a week. Come back. Nobody's quite sure if you're coming back or not, but I am back. Glad to report this time last week I was in London. And no offense to the Brits in the audience, but it's much better to be here. So let's continue. We're working our way through Tzurba Rabbanan. Actually, a few wonderful shiurim of Tzurba Rabbanan we taught in London. Just to give you a sense, we are part of a worldwide chabura, worldwide learning program. Different people across the world are learning this in a bit of a similar way to Daf Yomi. You know, it's a wonderful thing. You can go halfway across the world, you can pick up a book in halakha, you can ask people what they're learning, you can discuss it. And that's a very, very special part of this program to be a part of. So we're working our way through Hilchot Shabbat. We started last time, it was last week, but last year we started the Mavor, the introduction to Melachot Shabbat. Again, a bit of a different type of shir, a little bit more abstract. Now that we've finished all the Zachors, at least the part that we're going to be doing in this framework, we're going on to the Shamors. And before we get into the practical applications, we're looking at some of the principles. So I don't want to spend too much time on it now, but there's a couple of very, very important principles we have to discuss. And then we'll get into get a bit more practical. So let's begin on page 264. Last time we ended off, we spoke about the concept. And again, all these concepts will become clearer as time goes on. And as we see their practical applications, we discussed the idea of a melacha she'ena tzricha legufa, which is a very important concept in Hilchot Shabbat. That is one of the two famous machlokot between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Today we'll get on to the one which is maybe even more well known. First thing is, we have a concept of what's called a davar she'eno mitkaven. Davar she'eno mitkaven, meaning something which I do not intend to do, as opposed to melacha she'ena tzricha legufa, which we discussed last week, which is where you intend to do the melacha, but you intend to do that action, but maybe for a certain purpose, maybe for a different outcome. Davar she'eno mitkaven means I don't intend to do A, and I do A. I intend to do A, and I do B. Right? That's a no mitkaven. I don't have in mind that I'm going to perform this action. It's most famously known from Hilchot Shabbat, perhaps, but it is a concept that exists throughout the Torah. Many other different areas of halakha, we find this concept of a davar she'eno mitkaven as well. And here the Gemara gives us an example of a davar she'eno mitkaven. Again, the machloket amongst the Amoraim, we see as follows. Source number 29. So on page 264, so the Gemara Masechet Shabbat. It says, Rav Amar ein alchak Rabbi Shimon b'greira, v'Shmuel Amar alchak Rabbi Shimon b'greira. Okay, what is greira? Is dragging. Greira in modern Hebrew is towing. It's on my head right now because they're doing roadworks on our street, and they had all very scary signs throughout the week saying if you leave your car parked here from 7 o'clock in the morning, your car will be towed away. The garer. Right. So last week, of course, we moved our car before the evening, and 7 o'clock in the morning, there was nobody there. All the cars were still parked. Everybody was fine. Around 8:30, they started coming around and announcing. This week, we left our car till a little bit later. In any event, so what is grey rather, which the Gemara is talking about? So it says, Amar Abaye, Komile demar avid karav, levad manitlat avid kishmuel. Throughout the Gemara, when we have a machloket between Rav and Shmuel, we pass like Rav, with the exception of 3 cases. We pass like Shmuel, and this is one of them, where he says, Alachak Rabbi Shimon b'greira, that the Alachah here is going to follow Rabbi Shimon, as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda. When it comes to dragging, what do we mean? The Tanya, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Gorer Adam mita kiseh v'safsal, u'bilvad shelo yitkaven lasot charitz. The person is dragging a bench, a bed, or a chair along the ground, okay, and you don't intend to make a ditch in the ground. There is a melacha of plowing, melacha of choresh. When a person now is carrying this heavy item, carrying it along the ground, they're dragging it, they can't carry it, right? So when you're dragging it, what is your intent? If I were to ask you, what are you doing? Are you plowing the ground? You say, what are you talking about? I'm carrying a bench, right? That's what I'm doing. It may so happen that as a result of my dragging, I end up plowing, but that was not my intent. And therefore, that is a davar she'eino mitkaven. Rabbi Yehuda says that's going to be prohibited. Rabbi Shimon says no. This is mutar. And as opposed to a melacha she'ena tzricha legufa, which we saw last week, where there's a discussion whether it's chayav or patur, would it be yisur d'oraita, yisur d'rabanan? Here the discussion is forbidden or mutar. Mutar completely permitted. Okay, and this we'll see. This is without davar she'eino mitkaven, I don't think we'd be able to do anything on Shabbat. But we'll see that there are many leniencies that we have based on this idea of davar she'eino mitkaven. We've not yet come to psik ratio. We're going to get to that in a moment. But let's just see some of the sources dealing with this first. So source number 30, the Shulchan Aruch, brings to halacha. It says davar she'eino mitkaven mutar. Okay, all other things being equal, when you do not intend to perform the melacha, that is going to be mutar. We'll see later on the case whereby, does that mean you can do whatever I want? And a person can just close their eyes and say, oh, I didn't intend it, it was going to happen. So he says, no. We'll speak in a few moments precisely what psik ratio is. But therefore, says the Shulchan Aruch, gorer adam mita kisei v'safsal, you can drag them on the ground. Okay, the condition here is that in these cases where whatever one is doing, it's not certain. It's not inevitable that the melacha will necessarily take place. It may take place, it may not take place. You're dragging along the ground, depending how heavy it is, depending on the type of ground. Sometimes you drag it, it will make a ditch, sometimes not. That's where it's going to be permitted. So, for example, another case which comes up, a similar question regarding one walking on grass. We know that one is forbidden from uprooting grass, right? To sit on the ground and pull the grass out, like pull out leaves or something like that. That's going to be a derivative of the melacha of kotzer, of reaping, harvesting. That is forbidden. So sometimes you walk on the grass and your shoes are going to uproot the grass that's there. So says the Shulchan Aruch, when I walk along the grass, I don't intend to cut the grass, and it's not inevitable. Some steps that I take, some of the grass may be cut, sometimes it may not. And therefore, if I ask a person, what are you doing? You say, I'm walking. Okay, you're allowed to walk on Shabbat. We've never found that certain areas you can't walk, certain ways you can't walk, but generally speaking, just walking. The person wants to walk to shul. We haven't found that it's prohibited to walk on Shabbat, and therefore, that is going to be permitted. Shulchan Aruch Haravia says even if it's barefoot and the grass is going to get stuck in between your toes, that would still be permitted. Okay, a similar, slightly different case. The Shmat Shabbat Kilchata, number 33. He says, "Motar adam lakachech benachat besarot rosho v'zkeinu." Person is putting his hand through the hairs of his head, if you still have hairs on your head, or through his beard. Right? He doesn't need to be concerned that maybe a hair is going to become detached. It's getting more appetizing by the minute. If a person has even has bits of food that are left in between his beard and he wants to pull them out, that is fine. Because he's careful not to detach the hairs. Again, the point is that if a hair becomes detached and it wasn't necessarily going to happen, that's part of this idea of eino mitkaven. One more example, which you brought in the Tzitz Eliezer regarding brushing teeth. Brushing teeth is an entire sugya on Shabbat. Fascinating discussion. Maybe we'll get to it in a different year. But there's a misconception that exists that the reason those who are stringent not to brush teeth on Shabbat is because you might cause your gums to bleed. Right? So if you're going to cause your gums to bleed when you brush your teeth, that is a medical problem more than it is a halachic problem. You should go see the dentist. You should get that sorted out. But essentially, the Tzitz Eliezer says there's no psik ratio, meaning it's not inevitable that your gums are going to bleed every time you brush your teeth. If they are, as I say, go see the dentist. If you're in the shul, which we can recommend. But so long as it's not inevitable, it's not your intent. If I ask a person, what are you doing? And you say, I'm making my gums bleed, that's a problem. But that's not what you're doing. What you're doing is brushing your teeth. And therefore, a side action that may happen as a result, right? We've seen, I think, enough examples to understand clearly. A side action which may happen as a result, that is a davar she'eino mitkaven. Okay, these halachot are going to be very, very relevant when we get into all the questions of principles, when we get into all the questions of electricity, motion sensors. I think I mentioned it before, smart homes, etc. Many, many different applications of modern technology, we'll see that these ideas of davar she'eino mitkaven and psik reisha are going to be very significant. Okay, so that is davar she'eino mitkaven. Okay, so that is our first principle, whereby I don't intend to do something, and there is no inevitable result. However, what is the case whereby I did not intend to do something, but it's still going to be forbidden nonetheless? And that is what we call the case of psik reisha. Psik reisha literally means cut off its head. And the Gemara explains that it used to be in the days, once upon a time, they didn't have, the toy industry was not as developed as it is today. So you didn't have balls, etc., which were artificially made. They would cut off the head of a chicken and they would use that to play with. Okay, so the Gemara says, what if you want to cut off the head of the chicken? You don't want to kill the chicken. We know that killing, shchita, is one of the 39 melachot of Shabbat. You don't want to kill the chicken. You just want to use the head to play with. So it's eino mitkaven. Well, based on what we've said, right? You didn't intend to kill it. It just happened. It was a side action. Says the Gemara, that is ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Source number 35, we're on page 267. It says, Abaye v'Rava de Amitar Vayu. Right, sometimes you find in the Gemara where you have two Tanaim or two Amoraim who are Barei Plukta. They always argue with each other. Rav and Shmuel, Abaye and Rava, always arguing. Yes, it's the Gemara, Abaye, Rava, Amitar Vayu. Even Abaye and Rava agree. This is a halacha which is so obvious, right? Everybody agrees. Abaye and Rava normally argue about everything. On this, they both say the same point. And the same point they say is this. Modeh Rabbi Shimon, remember, Rabbi Shimon is the one who says, davar she'eino mitkaven mutar. It's permitted when I don't have intent, but even so both Abaye and Rava agree that Rabbi Shimon agrees that the psik reisha v'lo yamut. Right? Can you say, sever its head and it won't die? That's impossible. That's ridiculous. You can't say no mitkaven because it's definitely going to happen. And that is the principle. When I have something which is a no mitkaven, I don't intend to perform that specific action, that specific outcome. But nonetheless, I say I'm doing A, I don't intend to do B. But if I do A, B will definitely happen. That is psik reisha v'lo yamut, and our default position is to say that psik reisha will be forbidden. Okay, Rashi says over here, you'll notice, we quote the Gemara in Shabbat. Rashi over here is from Masechet Sukkah. We'll see in a moment what Sukkah has to do with psik reisha. But he says, right, a person says, I'm going to cut off the head of the animal on Shabbat. I don't want it to die. That's not what I'm... That's ridiculous. Since it is impossible that it will not die, we have to consider it as if that was your intent, because it couldn't be any other way. The Rambam in Hilchot Shabbat, we mentioned last time, that the Rambam structures his halachot. He begins with all the fundamentals. Nobody before him built it, ordered it in this way. But he says, source number 37, Asa ma'aseh v'na'aset biglalo melacha shevadai te'aseh b'shvil oto ma'aseh. So a person did an action, right? So did action A, and because of it, certainly a melacha would have been done because of it. Af al pi shelo nitkaven she'adavar yadua she'ei efshar shelo te'aseh melacha. He says it's forbidden, even though that was not your intention, because it's impossible that action could not have been done. Okay, so we'll see some of the examples in a moment. It's interesting to note, by the way, there is a probably more ink has been spilled on this issue than anything else in Hilchot Shabbat. The definitions, davar she'eino mitkaven, psik reisha, melacha she'eina shachal legufa. Many Mepharshim point out that the example that the Gemara gives of psik reisha, which is a davar she'eino mitkaven, is actually an example of a melacha she'eina shachal legufa. If you think about it, because here you do intend to cut off the head of the chicken. That's the action. That's the melacha. The point is, you're doing it not for the purpose of the melacha. You're doing it for a different purpose, but your intent is in that action. So it's ironic and somewhat counterintuitive. Right, much has been discussed in the Achronim about these issues. That the example of psik reisha is actually an example of a melacha she'eina shachal legufa. I'll leave you to think about that in your own time. But getting back to our idea of psik reisha, the principle which still stands. So the Shulchan Aruch in source number 38 gives an example. Zachlim baginot. Person is eating out in the garden, right? Asurim. So now the question is, maybe on Sukkot, you're outside and whatever it is, and now you come to Hamotzi and you need to wash your hands. You need to do Natilat Yadayim, and it's hard to go maybe inside, maybe it's far away. So, Surim, you might say, let's just bring out a jug of water and let's wash your hands out in the garden. You are not allowed to wash your hands over the grass because you are pouring water over the grass and you are therefore watering, and that is the malacha. So again, my intent was not to water the grass. My intent was to wash my hands. So I say, not so fast as the Shulchan Aruch. The She'eino Mitkaven only works when it's not inevitable. You're going to tell me that because of the laws of gravity, that you're washing your hands over the water, definitely some of the water is going to spill onto the grass, and therefore, it says, even though it's not your intent, it's definitely going to happen. Okay, other liquids which are not going to be beneficial for the growth, that would be permitted because that's not the malacha. So says the Ramah, the koshi yesh lezeh shelo yiplu shamayim. Says the Ramah, okay, talking about a naturality where it's going to be impossible not to spill any water over the grass. You should be careful and you should not eat there. Okay, so that is the case. That is the classic case of psikration. Now, there may be, essentially in the Gemara, and really in most of the Rishonim, some of the Rishonim at least, certainly in the Gemara and certainly in the Rambam, we don't find any further distinctions beyond this. We have the concept of She'eino Mitkaven, we have the concept of psikration, and that's it. That's where it ends. However, there are a number of contradictions between different sugyot in the Gemara, where sometimes it sounds like psikration is forbidden, sometimes it sounds like psikration under certain circumstances may be permitted, and therefore how do we resolve it? So the Rishonim come up here with a whole series of principles. There's not just psikration, but there's what we call psikration de nichalei and psikration de lo nichalei. As I mentioned, it's very interesting because this distinction does not appear in the Gemara, it does not appear in the Rambam either. The nichalei means something which is not, something which is comfortable, something which you are happy, you are pleased about the result. There are others actually who make a different distinction between what's called the psikration de ichpat le and psikration de lo ichpat le. It's something that even you don't care about, that is a different level, but we'll leave that out for now. Not everybody agrees with that. But where do we get to this idea of psikration de nichalei and lo nichalei? So we have a case in Sukkah, Masechet Sukkah, which is talking about the hadassim that you have for Sukkot. So again, without getting into the into all the halachot, if you have a look in the box in between source number 38 and 39, the second paragraph, it says here, one example of a psikration de lo nichalei can be found regarding the hadas needed for the arba minim on Sukkot. By nature, myrtle branches grow with both leaves and berries. Right? By the time we get our hadassim, generally speaking, I've just got the leaves left on them. But they grow, they have leaves and berries, and a branch would be unfit for use in the mitzvah if it has more berries than leaves. So what happens if you have your hadas? Once upon a time, there wasn't a whole industry. You get packets and packets, and they're very, very easily available. You look in all these things, and sometimes you take a historical perspective. You look in the shutim about arba minim, for example. There were cases whereby many of the towns in Europe, they had one etrog for the whole town. There are shutim which discuss: is it possible that the chazan could discharge the obligation of everybody else to have the arba minim? So we know nowadays everybody's got their own set, and those who don't have their own set, the shul has a spare set or a few sets or whatever it is, and everybody can have it. It's not too much of a problem. But once upon a time, it was to have a arba minim, everybody for themselves. That was unthinkable. So they asked, could it be that one person could do it and fulfill everybody's obligation? But so you have this hadas. This is all we managed to get hold of, and it's got the leaves and it's got the berries on it. So if you pick off the berries, you're going to make it kosher. Now, could you pick off the berries on Shabbat or on Yom Tov? Well, you're essentially fulfilling an act of metaken. You're correcting something. This may be a malacha, maybe a derivative of a malacha. So says the Gemara here, and this is where we saw Rashi before, but it's based on this Gemara Masechet Sukkah, on source number 39, the bottom of page 268. Tanu Rabbanan, ein mematin b'Yom Tov, mishum Rabbi Eliezer b'Rabbi Shimon mematin. Right, so Tanu Rabbanan, the first opinion says you cannot diminish, i.e. you can't remove these berries on Yom Tov from the branches. In the name of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon says you can. So says the Gemara, you are preparing a kli, you're taking something which was unfit for use, you're making it fit for use. That's going to be a prohibition. So it says, Amar Rav Ashi, we're on to the next page now. Amar Rav Ashi kegon sheliktan achila. You took the berries off in order to eat them, right? And certainly on Yom Tov, that would be okay. Right? Maybe even on Shabbat, in terms of the fact that this is a branch which is unattached to the ground. Right? What are you doing over here? You're putting up the berries. You're not. If I ask, what was your intent? What was your action? Your action was you're putting up the berries to eat them. You're eating berries. You're not correcting. You're not fixing your hadas, so to speak. But we just said that by doing so, it's certainly causing that result. Right? You can't plead ignorance here. You can't plead ignorance when you're doing something which will inevitably cause the melacha to be done, cause the forbidden act to occur. So once it's the Gemara, you have another bundle. In other words, you have extra hadassim. So the hadas that you're taking off, it's not your intent to use that one for the mitzvah because you have another one which you could use. So what happens to psik reisha? So there's still a psik reisha, but the fact is, as you can see, you're not interested in it. You're not interested in the result that comes about from that psik reisha. So that would be what we call psik reisha delo nichale. That's not. I'm not interested in the result, the melacha result which happens. See the Ritva in source number 40. He says. Right, this is the Aruch, who's one of the Rishonim who explains in this way. Is even though what you're doing, you are performing this tikkun, and in psik reisha v'lo yamot, ela kshu ne'aneh mimelachto. Right, the Aruch holds that the din of psik reisha is only going to be when you are benefiting from the melacha. Kevan shoseh v'lo mitkaven, v'vi rayot rabot lakem shva'azov v'lo. Okay, the Ritva disagrees. He's not disagreeing. Now, the Aruch is going to say, if the psik reisha delo nichale, that's going to be that it is mutar. Others will say, no, psik reisha delo nichale means it's not necessarily that it's mutar, means that it's so now the Rabbanan goes down a level. Others will say, no, psik reisha delo nichale, it's still going to be, might still be forbidden. Okay, that is the case here. So if you have a look at the Mishnah Berurah, again, going back to our case of watering the grass, source number 41, on top of page 270. He writes like this. He says, the psik reisha, we said, if you're going to wash your hands over the grass, that's certainly going to occur. Now, what happens if you're eating it's not your garden, right? It's not in the garden of your friend, somebody who you can ask the question. If it's not your friend, what are you doing eating in his garden? But anyway, that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. So if it's in your garden, I understand you're ultimately getting benefit from the fact that the grass is being watered. So you're interested in that. So where there is somebody else's, it's a stranger, and you're not getting benefit from it. So he says now, and this is in bold in your books, Yesh matilin dasvir since this is, as we said, psik reisha delo nichale, whereby you're not interested in you're not getting benefit from it. Shali af lekatchila. So there are those who say that's the Aruch, that this would be mutar lekatchila, completely permitted. V'arbei poskim osrim gam psik reisha delo nichale lekatchila. However, there are many poskim, and again we'll get into this in more detail later on. But there are many poskim who say no, even though it's a psik reisha delo nichale, it doesn't make it completely permitted. It's still going to be forbidden. It goes down a notch, perhaps, but it is still going to be forbidden. Rav Ovadia Yosef, source number 42, he adds another factor into the mix. He says, when we're dealing with an isur d'Rabbanan, i.e. the action which I'm performing, and the psik reisha which takes place, the melacha, so to speak, or the forbidden action that will certainly take place, that is a forbidden action, midrabanan. Then he says, if it's a psik reisha delo nichale midrabanan, that is completely permitted. Okay. Many of the Ashkenazi poskim disagree with that. Again, all of this is based on how you learn out the sugyas and how you do the cheshbon, about different things come together. But that is the opinion of Rav Ovadia. He relies on that heavily. By the way, he has a long tshuva regarding Dud Shemesh, which maybe we'll get to today, maybe we'll get to another time. But in terms of whether it's permitted to pour hot water from Dud Shemesh on Shabbat, Rav Ovadia is lenient, And a large part of what he's lenient on is the fact that he holds that it will be a psik reisha b'drabanan. If you hold that a psik reisha b'drabanan, but regard that a psik reisha Rabbanan does not make it mutar, as many of the Ashkenazi poskim do, so then you still would have a problem there. See the Shemirat Shabbat Kilchata, number 43. Also, so he gives a different example here of a psik reisha. He says, "Dugma ledavar adam shesoged delet bebeito letumo." Right, let's say there was an animal in my house and I closed the door. Depending on the size of the animal, that could be considered trapping the animal. But again, my intent was not to trap the animal. My intent was to close the door. So that is a no mitkaven, but it's a psik reisha. The animal's definitely there. It's definitely going to be trapped. So he says, "Omnam ze isu midrabanan." This would be a rabbinic prohibition. Ki mitchama cheder hu gadol v'lo nechshav letzedakah gemura. Im ken ze psik reisha midrabanan. In other words, what you see from here is that the Shema Shabbat Kechata says, no, even if it's psik reisha, the lo nichalen, even if it's midrabanan, it would still be an isur drabanan to perform it. There is a Pri Megadim where it talks about Mishnah Berurah quotes him as well, where there is two drabanans which come together. That could be mutar. Okay, so those are some of the principles, and as I say, we'll see in more detail as we go through the various malachot and see how it fits in. But essentially, to remember, just a very, very brief recap. We said the first stage is davar she'eino mitkaven. When I do not intend to perform the melacha, intend to perform action A, as a result of action A, melacha B will take place. I don't intend to perform it. If it's not inevitable, so that is mutar lekatchila. That according to everybody. If, however, it is inevitable that the melacha will take place, that is psik reisha. Psik reisha, our default position is that is forbidden. Where may a psik reisha nonetheless be permitted? If we say there is a psik reisha de lo nichale, where I'm not interested and I'm not, I get no benefit from the result that comes out of it, so then that's going to be a machloket. There are those who say that is mutar. There are those who say that is still forbidden. There are those who say if it's a psik reisha de lo nichale b'drabanan, right? We saw Rav Avadia that would be permitted. Others say no, that is still forbidden. If there are two drabanans, then there are even more who say that would be permitted. One application of this, and it's not only based on this, but I think we've mentioned before, is the case whereby one is walking home from shul or walking wherever you are, and there are lights with electronic sensors, which is ubiquitous nowadays. So when this first came out, this made a big controversy. Many different tshuvot were written, etc. And in the early days, when this first had it, and you probably remember, people would be walking on, you would always see people walking to the other side of the street so as not to operate the lights, etc. Nowadays, wherever you go, it's almost impossible that you're going to walk down the street if you're walking any length of time and no lights are activated. It's just these things have become more and more ubiquitous in our lives. But the question is that necessary in the first place? Meaning, let's think about it from the perspective of a no mitkaven and from the perspective of psik reisha. There are other factors which come into play as well. There's a famous tshuva of the Shevet HaLevi. We've certainly discussed it here in this shul, maybe not in this forum. But so I'm walking. If you ask me, what is your intent? My intent is not to turn on the lights. My intent is to walk. Okay, let's say I'm in a new place, I'm in a new area. I've never seen it. I have no idea. So when I'm walking, I activated the sensor, turn on the light. Okay, that is one scenario. Let's say I know every week I walk past and I take the same sensor. I walk, the house 3 doors down from where I come home. There is a light outside that's going to go on. So there, certainly, I know. So you might say, okay, that's a psik reisha. But then you'll say the following. You'll say, at the end of the day, I have no interest in turning the light. I know the light's going to go on. At somebody else's house, I have no interest. It doesn't really affect me. So that could be psik reisha de lo nichale. That certainly, according to some poskim, would be enough to permit it. According to other poskim, as we said, it's not enough to permit it. And that's why we need the Shevet HaLevi. If you want to know what the Shevet HaLevi says, you have to keep coming to the Shurim. We'll get there eventually. At the bottom line, he says that it's mutar. He has his reasoning, very interesting explanation why. I think actually in the book, it's here on page 285. There's an essay by one of our many good Torah participants, and then discusses the idea of psik reisha, motion sensors. I think we quote the Shevet HaLevi over there as well. But that's just to give you a sense of the difference between nichale and lo nichale. Meaning, if it's my house, right, or if I'm in an apartment building and I walk down to the corridor where I can't see anything, So if I'm walking through and then I activate the light, I'll get benefit because I'll be able to see. There, it would be very, very difficult to say that is a psik reisha de lo nichele. Again, I'm not right now getting into the question permitted, forbidden, etc. There are other factors as well. But just from this perspective, how do we define this act as a psik reisha de nichele or de lo nichele? So I'm walking in a street which is well lit, and a light comes on from a motion sensor. It's not my house. It's irrelevant to me. De lo nichele. It's got nothing to do with me. If I'm walking in a place which is completely pitch dark, and I need the light, and I'm going to get benefit from the fact that I've now activated it. So from this perspective of psik reisha, that would be more problematic. This came up when we were in England. So we used to go vernacular camps, etc. So every time you go to a new campsite, and nowadays, again, it's getting more and more difficult. In the olden days, they used to go and ask them, keep the lights on or keep the lights off, deactivate the motion sensors. Nowadays, in many places, it's impossible. All the electricity is connected in such a way, and there's a wire to rewire the whole thing is impossible. So you have situations sometimes whereby we're talking about inside, in corridors, right, where it's going to be pitch dark. There are no lights. You can't leave the lights on. It's all done in order to save electricity and save money, etc. So what do? So one of the solutions is where the light can't be left permanently on or permanently off, you put another light in the corridor. You put another light in there so that one doesn't need the main light that's going to come on. You're not getting benefit. At most, it would be therefore become a psik reisha de lo nichele. And again, in combination with other factors, that could be mutar. Okay, I'm going to skip mitasek for the moment. This is another principle that we have, whereby again a person is not really performing an action. A person is just how would you translate mitasek? You're just you're not really engaged with this. You're doing something else, and it sort of happens. The Gemara gives an example by shofar, for example. A person's just playing with a shofar, and it happens to be that the sound of tzkiyat shmarim comes out. Just happens to be. I wasn't actually blowing the shofar. It wasn't my intent. That's what's called mitasek. As we've seen with all the different principles, when it comes to Hilchot Shabbat, needs to be melechet machshevet. Needs to be something I'm thinking about. It's constructive. There's purpose. There's intent behind it, and therefore that's going to go down. It's going to be either exempt or going to be mutar when I'm dealing with that. Let's just spend a few minutes talking about grammar. This one comes up a lot as well. We talk about technology. Talking about all sorts of electrical devices, all sorts of things which operate on a principle of grammar. Last year, I think it was, Rav Zimmerman from Achon Somet gave a whole series of shirim here about this. Page 276 in the book. So we'll see the classic case which the Gemara brings. And again, the difficulty with many of these principles is that the Gemara doesn't just list the principle and say how it works. The Gemara gives us an example, gives an application in regards to one melacha. Does that mean that the principle applies to all other melachot? Does it mean it applies in all situations? Not so easy to tell. And we have machlokot rishonim, machlokot achronim, as we'll see. Here the case is, when it comes to if you have a fire. Nowadays, if a fire breaks out on Shabbat, you can extinguish the fire because there is a direct threat to life, it's pikuach nefesh. It seems to be, unless it's in a place, if you're in an area whereby a fire breaks out and it's, the fire is contained, even if it's going to destroy property, and even if it's going to destroy your possessions, you'll lose a lot of money out of it. But it's in such a way, it's hard for me to think of an example, but it's in such a way where it's not going to cause any threat to life, you would be forbidden to extinguish the fire. If there is a chance, right, as we know, safek pikuach nefesh, if there's even the smallest chance that, I shouldn't say the smallest, but there is a chance that it's going to lead to loss of life, even if it's improbable, so you're allowed to extinguish the fire. And that would be the case the way that our cities are built nowadays. That is going to be the case in nearly all, 99.9% of the time. But in the days of the Gemara, it was not like that. However, it was the way things were constructed. And what happens if a fire breaks out? Again, a fire which is not causing any threat to human life, but it's going to cause damage to property. So the Gemara says that there is a solution to this. You can establish a barrier. You take vessels, you take these pots and you fill them with water and you place them in the line of the fire. And what's going to happen is when the fire reaches there, it's going to shatter the vessels. The water is then going to extinguish the fire. So what have you done? You've not performed any direct melacha. All you did was you filled the jug with water and you put it away from the fire, but you're indirectly causing, right? That's what's called grammar, causation. So the Gemara discusses the concept of grama. It comes up in the realm of damages as well, kama in terms of nezikin, and again, part of the discussion is what is the relationship between grama and Hilchot Shabbat versus grama and Hilchot nezikin. Okay, but our Mishnah, source number 49 says, "Osim machitza b'kol hakelim bein meleim bein meleikanim b'shvil shelo tavor ad leika." You make this barrier of these vessels to stop the fire. Rabbi Yossi oser b'klei cheres chodashim meleim mayim לפי שאין יכולים לקבל את האור והם מתפקעים ומכבים את הדלקה. So Rabbi Yossi is stringent where you are indirectly going to extinguish the fire. Says the Gemara, למאמר דרבנן סברי גרם כיבוי מותר, Rabbi Yossi סברי גרם כיבוי אסור. So that seems to be the machloket between them is whether indirectly performing the malacha is forbidden or permitted. כתיב לא תעשה כל מלאכה, סיוד אסור גרמה שרי. Okay, so now our question is, even if we accept that over here gram kibui is mutar, maybe we say that indirectly performing the malacha, it's certainly going to be permitted on a D'oraita level. The question is on a Rabbanan level, is it still allowed or is it forbidden? Over here, you say maybe Rabbanan only allowed it because it's a fire. It's a case of great loss. It's hefsed merubeh, and therefore it's permitted. By other cases and by other malachot, it would not be allowed. There's also going to be, by the way, a distinction here between Shabbat and Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, we're much more lenient in terms of grama as well. And that's why, so for example, when you have the time switches, like the Sha'on Shabbat, generally accepted that let's say I've left my Sha'on Shabbat on the plata or on the aircon or whatever it is, and I notice it's going to go off, or I need shul was very, very late. The rabbi spoke for too long in the morning, and by the time I got home, all the food's going to get cold because the hot plate's going to. Of course, would never happen here, but the hot plate is going to go off. So if it's still on, to extend the current state, on Shabbat, to extend the current state would be permitted, so long as the hot plate is currently on. If I move those pins to keep it on, what's that?
Mechanical clock would that be switches?
The switches on the
clock has levers on.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm saying so whatever the current state is currently on, and I want to push a few more so that it will stay on, will delay it going off by an hour or by 15 minutes, whatever. That's allowed. If it's currently off and I want to extend the time that it's going to stay off, that would also be allowed. That's on Shabbat. But to bring something forward the other way around, that would be forbidden. On Shabbat. I'm saying to extend the current state would be allowed on Shabbat. There are those that are more stringent on it, but the Shema Shabbat Kerchala allows it because. But if you want to change it, so in other words, I want to bring it. It's currently off, and I want to bring it on to come on earlier, or it's currently on, and I want to turn it off earlier. That on Shabbat that would not be allowed. On Yom Tov, that would be we'd be more lenient about it. Maybe a difference in terms of bringing it on or turning it off as well. But again, here we're not dealing with any direct melacha. We're dealing with the case of grama. Essentially, the idea is by extending the current. I'm not causing any change. I'm just extending what currently is, and therefore I'm not doing any melacha. That's not even grama, and that's why many poskim Shema Shabbat Kilchata, if I'm not mistaken, rules that is allowed. So Shulchan Aruch source number 50, he says, going back to this case of the fire, he says, "Osim mechitza b'chol hakelim להפסיק בין הדליקה, אפילו כלי חרס חדשים מלאי מים, etc." The Rama adds into him very, very important words. He says, "B'mkom pseida." That which we say that grama is permitted, that is in the case of loss. Excuse me. And again, thank you. Again, source number 51, the Biur Halacha. He says, "Gram kibui mutar." He says, "Lav dafka kibui to melacha she'ena tzorcha legufa." Okay, da'afilu b'kol ha'melachot azim ken v'ken nir'a li. So that is, he says, the concept of grama would be relevant for all different melachot, but as we've already seen, that would only be where there is in a case of loss. So again, this really does need to be examined and discussed on a case by case basis. Okay, so that takes us to the end of the summary, the end of the introduction of the Hilchot Shabbat. takes the end of volume 17, because Rabbi Hashem next week or the week after we'll begin volume 18. So there are another, here we have Hilchot Bishul 1, Hilchot Bishul 2, and Hilchot Bishul 3. So this is going to take us for a number of shiurim. The laws of Bishul are very, very, very complex. Now, anybody who learns Hilchot Shabbat, goes into a kollel and starts learning Hilchot Shabbat, generally speaking, you start off with Hilchot Bishul. And there's a few reasons for that. One reason is that in the Shulchan Aruch, the very first simanim, Reish Nun Gimel, of Hilchot Shabbat, deal with Hilchot Bishul. But Reish Nun Gimel does not actually deal with Hilchot Bishul. The way, as we discussed last time, the way that the Shulchan Aruch is ordered is that it goes chronologically. So we start talking from Erev Shabbat, going to Friday night, going to Shabbat morning, all the way until Shabbat Shlishit and after that. So what's the first thing when we're thinking about before Shabbat? Is you have to cook the food before Shabbat and you have to heat it up. And how do you keep it hot? And what do you do, etc. So there's a whole category and we'll get into this. But it's helpful in terms of the framework. And I'll repeat this idea again. But in terms of the framework of thinking about the halachot, I remember before I went into the army, so we had in yeshiva, they gave us shiurim achana letzava, preparation for the army. So there were different elements of that. And one of them was learning halachot, learning halachot kashrut and Shabbat. And when you're in these less than ideal situations, what happens? Now remember the Rabbi Torah said, that he had been learning these halachot for years, and he'd been teaching these halachot for years. But it was only when he had to start teaching in terms of preparation in a very sort of concise way that he worked out this framework in his head to make it much, much easier, which is you talk about Hilchot Bishul, the Oraita, and then we talk about Hilchot Bishul, the Rabbanan. Okay, this is not the way the Shulchan Aruch breaks it up. That's why it's so complicated. When you learn in Shulchan Aruch, if you learn Mishnah Berurah, for example, Chelek Gimel, according to its order, so you start off with the Reish Nun Gimel, you have to wait until you get to Shin Yud Chet before you actually get to the definition of Bishul, of Bishul D'Oraita. So a lot of the questions of what Bishul D'Oraita, we'll see. How many people go around cooking on Shabbat? Not very many, thankfully. I'm talking about people who are Shabbat observant. And it doesn't come up so often in terms of that. What comes up, what is much more often is we heat up food. We take food out, we put it on the hot plate, etc. What can you put on? When can you put on? What if it's soup? What if it's liquid? What if it's solid? What about the cholent? Can you add water? All these questions come up. And it's all related to the Chut Bishul. Another area, which is very, very much related, boiling water is considered Bishul. That's considered cooking. So in terms of Tut Shemesh or electric boilers, turning on hot water tap. So these are Masim Shebachol Yom. These are very, very common questions. So Hilchot Bishul is a very broad area. It's very complex and it's very relevant and practical. So that's why we spend a lot of time dealing with that. But what I'm saying is we always have to think, whenever we have a practical question, and again, it's going to take us some time. First, we need to look at the fundamentals. We need to look at the principles, and we'll go through. And there are many different principles which we need to examine. What is the definition of Bishul? Right? What types of heat? What types of vessels? Does it apply to cooked food, to solid food, to liquid food, etc.? But then, when we get to the stage of a practical question, we'll get there eventually, right? When the question comes up, we always have to think about it on two levels. Level number one is there Bishul D'Oraita? Is there cooking taking place on a Torah level? Okay, and you'll say, if the food's already cooked, how can it be? We'll see. It's solid, liquid, etc. It's going to be. It can happen sometimes. But even if the food is cooked, that we have a question of Bishul on a D'Oraita level. So that's always the first question we have to realize. We have to work through in our heads. Once we've solved the problem of cooking on a Torah level, we've established that is not taking place because the food's already cooked, whatever it is. Then the question is there now a rabbinic prohibition of cooking? Okay, and we'll see. That is generally the questions of putting food on the hot plate, etc., are related to rabbinic prohibitions. There's a whole series of rabbinic prohibitions related to cooking, what's called Sheyah, Chazara, and Hatmana, because Rabbanan were worried. They were worried that you may come to stoke the coals. That is that's the classic case that's brought in the Gemara. You put hot food which is fully cooked before Shabbat. Let's say solid food. It's fully cooked. It's hot. Right, you're going to put it on put it in the oven or put it on top of the fire. There is no Isur D'Oraita that could take place in that situation because it's already fully cooked. Assuming that it is the type of food it's fully cooked, it's only going to get worse the longer it's on the fire, etc. But Chachamim said you're going to put it on. You might come to stoke the coals. You want it to get hotter, etc. That's going to be a prohibition, and therefore they said there are certain ways it's allowed, certain ways it's not allowed. Another concern that Rabbanan have is what's called michzikim basher. Something may appear to be cooking. even though I'm not actually cooking, I take a pot of food and I put it on the fire. My neighbor sees what I'm doing, or person in the household sees what I'm doing, and they say, you can take a pot and you can put it on the fire on Shabbat, so you can cook on Shabbat. Right? So it has to be done in such a way that it does not appear to be cooking in any way, shape, or form. So those are the two different levels. Every question that comes up, that is the framework, that's the way we have to think about it. Number one, is there cooking taking place d'oraita? Number two, assuming there is no cooking taking place, like a flowchart, right? If the answer is yes, so then it's forbidden. But if the answer is no, then how do we circumvent? How do we get around those rabbinic prohibitions as well? Okay, so that's in terms of cooking. So we're going to need to know is in terms of what heat source is being used, what type of fire, what type of vessels. We'll get into Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, Kli Shlishi. That's a very, very interesting discussion. Has the food previously been cooked or not? Are we dealing with a solid or a liquid or a mixture of solids and liquids? Primarily solid, primarily liquid. All these things are going to affect. So these are all the questions when it comes to Hilchot Bishul. And then, of course, within that is going to be the application of newfangled cooking machines like a microwave oven or induction hobs and all sorts of things, which, aside from the questions of electricity, are these going to be permitted or not? I'll just share with you. One of those moving shilas I ever received actually was an elderly woman who was terminal at the time when she spoke to me. You know, it was a matter of time. And actually, I remember the family called and they said that the mother was kind of, depending on the day. I mean, she was in and out of lucidity. Not every day she was really aware of what was going on. But she had to speak to me. Before she died, she wanted to speak to the rabbi, and so I get a phone call. I say, the daughter called. She said, my mother is lucid. Can she speak to you? I'm thinking, I'm going to get some sort of she's going to talk about vidui. She's going to talk about end of life. There were all questions about the hospital. So she calls. She says, Rabbi, I'm so pleased you could answer. I want to speak to you. She says she has a non-Jewish helper at home, and she needs to eat, so she has soup. And she says she's never done it before. But now, on Shabbat, she needs the soup to be heated up. Can she ask her, is it okay for her to put the soup in the, for her to put the soup in the microwave and to heat it up? Because she doesn't want to do the wrong thing. So I'm so moved by this. This woman who is on Mikam Chai Yisrael, her last few days of her life, and this is what she's thinking about. In that situation, I told her, of course, that it was permitted and it was, but by any stretch, an elderly person is frail. That's what the food they need. That was in that situation that was allowed. But just just to think, what people are thinking of, and the care and just not to get things wrong. The smallest things. So that was something which is very moving. So we talk about Hilchot Bishul, we talk about microwave oven and things. I'm always reminded of the shaila and of this case. But we'll talk about it in terms of in a non-extenuating circumstance like that. Ordinary, a healthy individual, other things being equal, in terms of the microwave, what it's considered, not so clear. So, okay. So let's maybe just look very, very quickly at the first couple of sources, and with that we will call it a day. Page 295. 295. We have here the Av Melacha and Torada of Bishul. Now you remember. Then when we saw the Mishnah which listed the melachot in the Mishkan, so the melachot of Shabbat, it did not mention Bishul, it mentioned Ofer, which is baking. So here it says, the Gemara asks, why did it call it baking and not call it cooking? So the Gemara of Papa, Shava Ktana Didan Bishul Samanim Dava B'Mishkan. In the Mishkan you had cooking in terms of the dyes which were used for the different cloths of the Mishkan. So these dyes were cooked. But it doesn't mention that. It mentions Ofer instead. So Tanatidan Sidor the Patnakat. So we have that unit of melachot which make up the sequence of preparing bread. Okay, different understandings of what exactly means Sidor the Pat. There are those who understand that Sidor the Pat means in terms of performing, making the lechem apanim, making the showbread, which was in the Mishkan, and that is the order of melachot that we learn. Maybe it's just a memory device in order to understand the sequence. We go from plowing to planting, etc., all the way up to baking. But that is why it mentions baking versus cooking. Now, it's generally accepted baking and cooking are interchangeable. Both are the same melacha. You see the Rambam in Hilchot Shabbat Perek Tet over the page. He says, "Echad ofer et hapat או המבשל את המאכל, או את הסמנים, או המחמם את המים, הכל עניין אחד. Okay, so whether you're baking bread, whether you're cooking food, cooking dyes, whether you're heating water, as we mentioned, all of this is part of the same melacha. There is a difference between cooking and baking in terms of the practical ramifications when we get to the question of bishul achar bishul, whether something which is cooked has already been cooked on a d'oraita level. Do I consider food that has already been cooked? Can it be cooked again? So yeah, we have a distinction between solids and liquids. We have different ideas in the Rishonim, but there are those who point out that cooking after cooking is one question, but cooking after baking is something else. Even though because there are different processes which are performed, even though it's the same melacha, it may be a different action, and that may have ramifications as well. We just see source number 3 in the Rambam, and again, one of the things that comes out, which he points out, is that cooking does not just apply to food, right? But anytime we perform this action, right? If you melt metal, or you heat up coals, you heat up metal so that it becomes, red hot. This is also when it comes to electricity. There is heating up, plugging in something electric. Many people make have the misconception that any time that we turn on an electrical device, it's the melacha of fire. That's no longer the case. Once upon a time, it may have been the case, but anytime we have a red hot heating element, a lot of the new circuits don't. But if you have a hot plate, for example, you have a heater, different things, which has the old incandescent light bulbs, that is considered a gechelet shematechet. In any way, so that would be related to fire, not necessarily it's cooking, but in this case as well, so this is a Torah of cooking. So all these cases, if you match wax, tallow, tar, etc., these are all derivatives of cooking, which are asur, as we discussed last time. Tolada is still going to be asur d'oraita. You have pots, you have earthenware, which you put into the oven to become clay, to become hard clay. That is also considered cooking. So you see from here, it's not just food, but this is something which applies to other cases as well. Okay, next time we will, Bezrat Hashem, begin getting into some of the definitions, and eventually we'll get into some of the more practical cases, the shilas that come up in the kitchen every Shabbat. Everybody have a wonderful day and a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Right, how do I turn this off?
I'll do that.
Okay.